Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole heap of sources, could be investment finance, personal development, you name it, and we boil it all down into a focused strategy. And this deep dive, it's really customized for you, our listener, especially if you're aiming for a professional mastery in a field that's, well, demanding, high volume. We're thinking specifically about real estate today.
Exactly. And today's mission, it's crucial. We're basically synthesizing a toolkit for high achievement. The idea is to help you move from being that perpetual juggler, always reacting,
Putting out fires constantly.
right, to becoming a strategic professional who's intentionally building wealth. Now, the sources we've pulled together, they don't just offer simple time management tips. They lay the foundation for a whole high-performance system.
That's a really key distinction, isn't it? If you're in real estate, you know the drill. Balancing client needs, the paperwork mountain, and that relentless need for prospecting. It's nonstop.
It is. And our sources absolutely confirm without real clarity and intentionality, burnout isn't just a risk. It's pretty much inevitable.
So we're going beyond just, managing your to-do list. We're talking about mastering the whole process.
That's the goal. We want to extract those fundamental principles for maximizing your results. We're focusing on clarity, being intentional, and taking strategic action. And you'll see a lot of this framework revolves around short, intense bursts of focus, often within a 12-week kind of strategic period.
And the sources we're drawing on today are incredibly diverse.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got insights from habit research, specific strategies for buy and hold real estate, tax law nuances, some pretty direct negotiation tactics.
Hard knuckle, you could
Yeah, definitely. And even looking at the bigger picture, wealth creation, political influence. It's a real deep dive into not just building a career, but understanding the massive systems you're operating within.
So where do we start? It has to be with internal control, right? We need to lay out this high-performance blueprint first, really focus on intentionality and, critically, the power of habit.
Okay, let's unpack that, this foundational idea of achievement. The research on habits, it keeps coming back to the same thing, doesn't it? Success isn't usually one big lightning strike.
No, not at all. It's much more of a gradual evolution. It's built on, a long series of small wins. Tiny breakthroughs repeated over time.
That concept of atomic habits really nails it here, I think. We often think we need some huge revolutionary change.
Right. But the real progress, it comes from those small, consistent actions. The author pointed out, the difference between who you are now and who you'll be in 5 years. It really just boils down to the quality of your daily habits.
And for someone in real estate, that just makes perfect sense. You don't become a top producer from one lucky closing. It's because you consistently did the small things. That hour of lead gen every day, the systematic follow-up, entering the data properly.
Exactly. But here's the friction, right? A lot of people really struggle with forming good habits. And the materials highlight a key reason why. We often try to change the wrong thing. We focus too much on the results, not the underlying systems that actually produce those results.
And bad habits. Well, they seem to stick around forever once they're established. Procrastination, getting sucked into email or social media.
Oh, absolutely, especially the unwanted ones. So we need to understand the mechanism. How do we break those bad cycles and build the high payoff ones instead?
The sources point to a fundamental process, a 4-step feedback loop. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. It all starts with the cue. That's the trigger. The little piece of information that tells your brain a reward is coming. So if you want to prospect more, maybe the cue needs to be super obvious. Like an empty chair at your designated prospecting desk when you walk in.
Okay, the cue. Yeah. What?
Then comes the craving. That's the motivation, the desire to change your internal state. You don't actually crave the task of cold calling, right? You crave the feeling of success, the security of having a full pipeline. That's the driver.
Makes sense. Step 3.
Step 3 is the response. This is the actual habit you perform. And the key here is it has to be easy. If prospecting means logging into 3 different complex software systems, you've just added friction. You're less likely to do it. The response should be as frictionless as possible.
Reduce the barriers.
Precisely. And finally, step 4 is the reward. This satisfies the craving. It tells your brain, hey, that action was worthwhile. Remember it for next time. So maybe after your 60 minutes of lead gen, the reward is a scheduled, totally guilt-free 15-minute coffee break. That positive feedback reinforces the loop.
That clarity on the micro actions, it then seems to scale up into a bigger strategy.
Yeah.
That's where the 12-week here idea comes in.
Exactly. Most professionals, especially if they work on annual cycles, they fall into this trap of having way too many objectives spread out over a whole year.
And why is that annual plan such a pitfall? What's the damage?
Well, it basically breeds complacency, doesn't it? If you've got 12 months to hit a goal, you naturally think, oh, I've got time. You put it off. Maybe start thinking about it seriously in Q3.
You feel busy, but you're not necessarily focused on the highest impact things.
Right. You're diffused, spread too thin, and the result, usually frantic catch-up in November and December. Stressful, and often you don't quite hit the mark.
So the 12-week year flips that. It condenses the year into just 12 weeks.
Yes, and forces you to identify the top, maybe 1 to 3 things that will have the absolute greatest impact over the next 3 months. The focus shifts completely. It becomes about intense execution on a few critical goals, being great at a few things, not just mediocre at many, that urgency. That's what generates extraordinary results.
And this connects to that mindset you mentioned earlier, the fait accompli, the accomplished fact.
Precisely. When you operate in these 12-week cycles, you approach your key goals not as things you hope to achieve, but as things you are going to achieve. You leverage that intense focus, that momentum, to make the outcome feel almost like a certainty before you even start.
Okay, but let me throw some real-world friction in here. I'm a busy agent, right? I plan my 12 weeks meticulously. Top 3 objectives identified. Then, bam, week 3. This massive, unexpected deal lands on my desk. Needs 100% focus right now. It completely blows up my planned lead gen hours for the next few days. How does this intense 12-week year system handle that kind of necessary chaos?
That's a great question, and it's where the discipline really has to shift towards intentional time use and this core idea of acting on commitment, not feelings. Your plan absolutely needs buffer time built in, but crucially, you have to define and absolutely commit to your keystone actions.
Keystone actions. What exactly does that mean in a high-volume business like real estate?
Think of it as the core activity, or maybe just a couple of activities, that account for the vast majority of your results. In real estate, this is almost always going to be things like lead generation, high-value client consultations, or maybe structured database management. So if that big surprise deal throws your day off,
Which it will.
which it absolutely will, you still have to find the time, carve out the time for those, say, 60 minutes of committed keystone action. The sources really hammer this home.
Yeah.
You structure your days and weeks based on your plan, not just letting the day's emergencies dictate everything.
Discipline. Okay. But how do we track this effectively? We talked about not focusing just on results because they lag behind the effort.
Right. You need a quantifiable way to score your effort, your implementation. A weekly scoreboard is a great tool here. You're measuring your adherence to the plan, not just the outcome. You assign points to specific ABIs that stands for activity-based indicators.
Okay, ABI, like what?
An ABI is a measurable action that's directly under your control. So maybe it's make 20 follow-up calls, or send 10 personalized notes, or hold 2 buyer consultations, things you can actually do. You score your commitment to hitting those ABI targets each week. The goal should be an execution score of 85% or higher. That ensures you're consistently doing the work, even when you, frankly, don't feel like it.
That commitment piece again. Okay, this high-performance structure, it clearly needs a lot of energy, relentless energy, really. Which brings us nicely to daily routines and this miracle morning idea that pops up in the sources.
Yeah, the core idea there is to recreate that feeling, when you wake up genuinely energized and excited about the day, like you're starting a passion project, not just grinding through another day. It's about getting out of bed with a real purpose.
And that purpose then gets translated into actual productivity by being strategic about the first part of the day. Before noon, ideally.
Absolutely. Using that early time, which is often easier to control, for those strategically important items. The things that matter most for your long-term goals, your 12-week plan, it basically creates an energy plan that fuels everything else you do that day.
The sources often mention a framework for this morning routine, summarized by an acronym, SAVERS.
That's the one. S is for silence, could be meditation, prayer, quiet reflection. A is for affirmations. V is for visualization, vividly picturing achieving your 12-week goals. E is for exercise, even just a few minutes to get the blood flowing. R is for reading specifically material that improves your professional skills. And the final S is for scribing, journaling, planning the day, capturing ideas.
So those 6 things, done consistently, set you up to be proactive, not just reacting to emails and calls first thing.
Exactly. It puts you in the driver's seat for the day.
Let's linger on the affirmation piece for a second. The sources suggest these aren't just wishful thinking. They need to be actively designed, repeated daily, maybe even out loud, to really make an impression on the subconscious. How do we make sure they actually work? That they transform limiting beliefs rather than just sounding like empty self-help platitudes.
That's key. They have to be specific, they need to evoke emotion, and they must be actionable. They work by actively rewriting your internal narrative. So instead of just saying, I want to be rich, which is vague, a powerful affirmation might sound something like, I am a high-value solution provider who strategically connects with 10 new potential clients daily, and my disciplined action creates consistent financial freedom for my family. See the difference?
Yeah, connecting with leads directly to the desired outcome, financial freedom. It's grounded.
Precisely. It has to feel real, and it has to tie back to the actions you're committed to taking. That's how you start to overcome those deep-seated limiting beliefs.
Okay, so once we get that internal discipline dialed in, the focus shifts outward towards the actual systems, particularly in real estate, that reward that high performance. And our sources make a really sharp distinction early on between just earning money in real estate versus generating wealth through real estate investment.
In that distinction, it's absolutely paramount if your goal is building lasting wealth. A job in real estate earns you money today, sure, but it's directly tied to the hours you put in. Think flipping houses or, managing the transactional side for commissions.
The active income.
Active income, exactly. An investment, on the other hand, like owning rental properties, the classic buy and hold strategy generates money from largely passive sources. And importantly, it's rewarded by the financial and tax system itself. The perspective shift here is crucial, moving from being a full-time juggler of deals to becoming a strategic wealth builder.
And the sources seem pretty confident that real estate investors can actually accelerate wealth building faster than, say, just putting money in stocks or bonds. Why is real estate uniquely positioned for that?
It really comes down to how the systems are structured. The financial system, the tax code, even the legal system. Through things like depreciation, deducting mortgage interest, and especially leverage, they are deliberately set up to reward property owners, often more favorably than owners of other types of assets.
There's also a stability factor that gets highlighted quite a bit. Real estate, especially buy and hold, tends to be less volatile day to day than the stock market, right, when it's part of a diversified portfolio.
Generally, yes. Price volatility is often minimized over the long term. And the key is, you typically make your money when you buy, right? Securing a good deal below market value if possible. Then the fundamentals, like gradual rent depreciation and tenants paying down your mortgage principal, they just work relentlessly in your favor over time.
Let's dig into leverage a bit more. The sources really emphasize the strategic benefit of using loans, using mortgages.
Oh, it's huge. When you use a mortgage, your equity grows not just from appreciation, but significantly from that principal pay down, essentially. Your tenants are buying the asset for you over time. And that growth is magnified because you likely only put down a fraction of the total purchase price, maybe 20, 25%.
Amplified returns on your actual cash invested.
Exactly. And a common tactic mentioned, particularly for savvy investors looking to scale, is maybe buying a property with all cash initially, perhaps to get a better price or close faster.
Okay.
But then strategically adding financing later, usually about 6 to 12 months down the road, often through what's called a cash-out refinance.
Why wait? Why that specific timing?
Well, waiting allows for a couple of things. Maybe some minor improvements have been made or the market's appreciated slightly, but more importantly, it often satisfies lender seasoning requirements. You can then pull cash out based on the property's potentially appraised value, and critically, that cash comes out tax-free.
Tax-free because it's considered loan proceeds, not income.
Precisely. And then you can take that chunk of cash and immediately redeploy it into acquiring your next rental property. It's a powerful way to rapidly accelerate your portfolio growth using the bank's money and the tax code's rules.
Okay, shifting gears back to the core sales business for many agents listening. Lead generation. It's the engine, right?
Yeah.
Drives the whole volume business. And the sources are absolutely unanimous on this. Success isn't about one lucky deal. It's about consistency across many, many sales.
Absolutely. The strategic model for generating leads presented in some sources boils down to 3 core pillars. First, you have to actively prospect and market. Second, you need to set up a database and feed it consistently. And third, you must systematically market to that database. It's the systematic, non-negotiable approach that underpins high achievement.
The numbers shared about lead costs are pretty eye-opening, too. They really underscore why nurturing relationships is so critical. What are the key differences there?
The research is quite stark. If you're consistently marketing to the MET part of your database, these are people you already know. Past clients, referrals, sphere of influence. The cost per closed sale is incredibly low. Figures cited are often between, say, $99 and $198 per sale.
Wow. Yeah.
But if you're relying solely on generating leads from the haven't met portion people acquired through maybe broad online advertising, cold outreach, that cost per sale jumps dramatically. We're talking $300 to $600, sometimes even more, per closed transaction.
That's a massive difference. It really hammers home the value of building and nurturing that database, doesn't it?
It absolutely confirms that the keystone action of systematically nurturing those relationships is probably your highest leverage activity from a cost perspective.
And the message you use matters just as much as the system. The focus should be relentlessly on positioning yourself as a solution provider,
Right.
Solving people's property problems, not just being a salesperson.
Yeah. Yes, solving problems, being the expert advisor. And as professionals look to scale, maybe build a team, the focus has to shift again towards strategic accountability. The sources talk about hiring capacity talent, people who genuinely take specific, important tasks off your plate, freeing you up for those keystone actions.
Yes.
Versus cul-de-sac talent, as one source puts it. People who might seem helpful, but ultimately just create more dead-end work or require constant supervision. And accountability for any team members needs to tie back directly to those specific, measurable ABI, the activity-based indicators we talked about earlier, leading indicators of effort, not lagging indicators of results that are already in the past.
Right, tracking the inputs. Okay, so before any offer gets made, especially on investment properties, that due diligence phase has to be surgical. Running the numbers like a pro is absolutely critical.
Oh, it's non-negotiable. Due diligence for a potential purchase has to be exhaustive. You're checking comps, of course, but also verifying current rents on similar properties nearby, assessing market saturation, how many other rentals are competing, and digging deep into the actual utility bills, property taxes, and getting realistic estimates for repairs. You need to know the true condition and budget for future big-ticket items like roofs or HVAC.
The sources mention several key valuation benchmarks for quickly screening deals. What's the gross rent multiplier, the GRM, and how should our listener use that?
The GRM is a really quick, rough metric. You basically divide the property's asking price by its total annual gross rent. So a $200,000 property generating $20,000 in gross rent annually has a GRM of 10. You use this mainly to compare properties within the same specific market area. Is this property priced roughly in line with others based on its gross income?
So it's a quick filter, not the final word.
Exactly, just a starting point. Investors also look closely at capitalized value, or cap rate, and most importantly, the projected cash flow returns after all expenses and debt service. And here's something counterintuitive. The sources suggest sometimes you can actually achieve a great long-term return with a solid margin of safety, even if you pay slightly above the perceived market value.
Really? How does that work?
If your operating numbers are exceptionally strong, maybe you have a plan to significantly increase rents or reduce expenses, or if your financing terms are particularly advantageous. The purchase price is just one factor in the overall return equation.
Interesting. Now, there's also a specific point made about short-term rentals, STRs. This market can be super competitive. What makes due diligence unique here?
Couple of key things. First, in those hot markets with multiple offers flying around, asking for a viewing contingency, meaning you want time to physically see the property after your offer is accepted well, that can significantly weaken your offer. If possible, you really need to try and view the property before making your bid.
Gives you more certainty, makes your offer stronger.
Right. Second, and this is crucial for STRs, don't just take the seller's past rental numbers at face value. You absolutely have to analyze the previous management. Was it professionally run? Was it listed on all the major platforms like Airbnb and VRBO? The sources note that sometimes gross rental income can be almost doubled simply by improving the listing quality and using the main booking channels where the tourist traffic actually is. You're analyzing the management potential as much as the historical data. All right, so we've gone from internal habits to external strategy and analysis. Now let's get to the sharp end of the business, actually mastering the deal. Negotiation comes first. And top negotiators, according to our sources, understand something fundamental. Conflict isn't necessarily bad. Often it's the path you have to walk down to get to a truly great deal. It brings out truth, creativity, and ultimately resolution.
One of the most maybe counterintuitive tactics mentioned comes from that never split the difference philosophy, using calibrated how questions, like asking, how am I supposed to do that?
Yes, it's brilliant. It acts as a really gentle, non-confrontational way of saying no, or at least I can't agree to that term as stated. Instead of triggering defensiveness, it subtly pushes the other side to start searching for solutions to your problem. How can you do that? And when they start brainstorming for you, they often end up essentially bidding against themselves or offering concessions you didn't directly ask for.
Clever psychology.
Yeah.
Timing also seems absolutely critical in making deals stick. The advice is to try and get the seller to accept your offer or your counteroffer right then and there, while you're still with them.
That's the strong recommendation. If you let them leave the table without a signed acceptance, the odds of them calling you back to accept later drop significantly. Why? Because inevitably, they're going to talk to someone else, a neighbor or relative, another agent, tell them your offer number.
And that person says, oh, you can get more than that.
Right.
Or I'll give you $500 more.
Exactly. Someone else swoops in. Getting that commitment in the moment while the momentum is there is huge.
There's also a powerful sequencing tactic described for negotiation. Start with the small stuff.
Yeah, negotiate for the things that are least important to you first. Maybe it's asking for certain appliances to be included or requesting a slightly delayed closing date. You might even be prepared to concede on these minor points.
So why do it?
Because it creates negotiation momentum. You're engaging. You're making progress, even if you lose on small points. By the time you get to the really big issues like the purchase price, the sellers have already invested time and mental energy in the process of selling to you. They've made small commitments. It leverages that sense of psychological investment to help you secure better terms on the things that truly matter.
And this is just fundamental for protection.
Yeah.
Every contract, absolutely every contract, needs to have graceful ways out. Loopholes, essentially.
Couldn't agree more. You need contingencies built in just in case your deeper investigation begizes. The inspections, the financing approval, reveal something that makes it a bad deal after all. An acceptable financing clause is standard. An inspection contingency is critical. Buyers should never feel trapped if the terms they can actually secure aren't right or if major issues are uncovered. Protecting your earnest money deposit is paramount.
Okay, let's switch gears to presentation. Maximizing appeal through home staging. This applies whether you're flipping a property or advising a listing client, right? The core idea seems to be removing the owner's specific taste.
That's it exactly. Staging isn't about decorating to your taste or even the owner's taste. It's about neutralizing the space, decluttering, and arranging things to allow prospective buyers to easily visualize their own lives, their own furniture, their own dreams in that space.
First impressions start outside. Curb appeal. What are the key things there?
Make sure that front door is clearly visible and inviting. Trim back any overgrown shrubs blocking it. Think about lighting, too. Many showings happen in the evening, especially in winter. Showcase the exterior lighting fixtures and generally tidy up. Camouflage eyesores like trash cans or, the air conditioning unit if possible.
And clutter inside. It's not just about tidying up. The sources actually suggest it's almost a science. There's a quantifiable aspect.
There is. One source gives a really specific metric for bookshelves, which I found fascinating. It says a bookcase should only contain about 60% of its books, less than 2/3 full. So if you have, say, 350 books on a shelf, you need to pre-pack or remove about 140 of them. That measurable reduction makes rooms feel significantly larger, airier, and less personally cluttered by the current owner.
Wow, that's specific. And repairs.
Yeah.
Non-negotiable before listing.
Absolutely non-negotiable. The sources are definitive on this. Fixing anything that's obviously broken or not functioning before you list the property always pays for itself. Always. It prevents buyers from immediately trying to lowball the offer or demanding huge concessions at closing. You will pay far less to fix that dripping faucet yourself now than you will concede in a price reduction later, because the buyer will factor in their perceived hassle and risk on top of the actual repair cost.
It makes sense. Pay now or pay more later. What about color? There's a psychological aspect there too.
Yeah, for interior harmony, the advice is often to follow nature's rule. Think about the natural world. The ground is generally darker, heavier tones. The sky above is lighter, airier, so use heavier, darker shades nearer the floor for flooring, maybe rugs, and gradually use lighter shades as you move up the walls towards the ceiling. This creates a subconscious sense of balance, calm, and space.
Interesting. Okay, finally in this section, let's talk legal and tax leverage. This is crucial for protecting the wealth you're building and actually amplifying it. Entity structure seems vital.
It's absolutely foundational, especially for investment properties. Forming an LLC, a limited liability company, or sometimes an LP, a limited partnership, is strongly recommended. They offer flow-through taxation, first off, meaning the entity itself usually doesn't pay income tax. The profit or loss flows through to your personal tax return. But critically, they offer significant asset protection.
How does that protection work in practice? Let's say someone sues related to a rental property owned by an LLC.
Okay, in many states, the law provides something called charging order protection. This means if someone wins a lawsuit against you personally or against the LLC for something unrelated to the property itself, their ability to get at the assets inside the LLC, like the rental house, is restricted. Instead of being able to force a sale of the house or demand the LLC be dissolved,
They can't just take the property.
yeah, right. Often, their only remedy is to get a charging order. This basically entitles the creditor only to receive any future profit distributions that the LLC decides to make to you, the owner. And since you, as the owner or manager, can often decide not to take distributions, perhaps reinvesting profits back into the property instead.
The creditor gets nothing.
The creditor might get nothing or have to wait a very long time. They basically get a right to receive money that may never actually be distributed. This makes suing the LLC owner much less attractive in the first place. It's a powerful deterrent.
That's significant protection.
Yeah.
Now, let's hit some specific tax strategies. What are some of the big ones for property owners mentioned in the sources?
Okay, one fascinating loophole involves short-term rentals, STRs. If you rent out your primary home, the place you actually live, for fewer than 15 days total during the entire year, say you rent it out during a big local event like a festival or conference.
Okay, just for like 2 weeks.
Exactly, 14 days or less. That rental income you receive might be completely 100% tax-free under federal rules. And here's the kicker. Even though you earned that tax-free income, you generally still get to deduct your full mortgage interest and property taxes for that primary home, just like normal.
Wow. Okay, that's a nice perk. What about depreciation? That's a huge benefit for rental property owners. But are there common mistakes?
Depreciation is massive, yes. Residential rental property is typically depreciated over 27.5 years. A very common mistake, especially for newer investors or sometimes even inexperienced tax preparers, is forgetting to properly allocate the purchase price between the building and the land.
Why does that matter?
Because land is not depreciable. Only the building and improvements are. So, when you buy a property, you need to determine a reasonable value for the land itself, often based on the tax assessment ratio or an appraisal, and subtract that from the total purchase price. The remaining amount is your depreciable basis for the building. If you mistakenly depreciate the entire purchase price, including the land value, you're overstating your depreciation deduction, which could lead to problems later. Conversely, if you don't properly assign value and forget to depreciate the building, you're missing out on significant tax deductions year after year.
Getting that allocation right is key. And the overall message seems to be tax planning needs to be proactive, right? Not an afterthought.
Absolutely essential. Waiting until January or February to talk to your tax advisor about the year that just ended is often way too late to implement major strategies. Things like maybe using a self-directed IRA to invest in real estate tax-free, or structuring a large bonus or severance payout in a tax-advantaged way. These things require planning during the year. Tax savings should really be part of your systemic review process, maybe even tied into those 12-week cycles we discussed. So we've covered a lot on the how to executing the plan, protecting yourself legally and financially on the micro level. But a truly high-achieving professional, they also need to understand the bigger picture, the macro environment they're operating in, which brings us to the broader systemic context that emerged from some of our source material.
Yeah, this transition from, say, tax code details to global economics or even political history might seem like a big jump, but it feels critical for context. The sources highlight that knowledge itself is often cited as one of the scarcest resources of all, and that the effectiveness of different economic systems hinges on how they handle this scarcity of knowledge. Why should a busy real estate agent care about abstract ideas like knowledge scarcity?
Because it fundamentally defines the value you bring. Think about it. In a functioning market economy, decision makers, your clients, they don't need to know every intricate detail of supply chains or global finance. They just need to be confronted with the relevant costs and benefits, often summarized by prices, to make reasonably rational choices. Your role as the professional is to gather, filter, and interpret that vast, scarce knowledge, market comps, neighborhood trends, inspection results, financing options, negotiation leverage points, and then present your client with the clear costs and benefits needed for their specific decision.
So I'm the knowledge conduit and interpreter.
Exactly. Contrast that with, say, centrally planned economies, where planners fail precisely because they try to gather and quantify every complex piece of information themselves, which is basically an impossible task due to that inherent scarcity and dispersion of knowledge. Your value lies in navigating that complexity for others.
Okay. And shifting to investor psychology, the research in behavioral finance comes up too, suggesting many investors are, well, not always perfectly rational.
Far from it, often. Decisions are frequently constrained less by objective analysis or stated risk tolerance and more by irrational impulses. Things like FOMO, fear of missing out, driving prices up in a frenzy, or panic selling during downturns, herd mentality.
And this actually reinforces the value of the methodical, disciplined approach we talked about earlier.
Right.
Running the numbers, sticking to your criteria.
Absolutely. Having that rational step-by-step process for evaluating deals, for managing your time, for sticking to your plan, it becomes a profound competitive advantage in a market often swayed by emotion and impulse.
There's also a really interesting, maybe cautionary insight from the finance world mentioned. Stock market strategies that become widely known, especially after being published in books or articles, they often stop working. Why is that relevant here?
Because markets adapt. If a secret way to beat the stock market gets out, enough people try to exploit it that the pricing inefficiency it relied on disappears very quickly. The market corrects itself. This reinforces the idea that in real estate, while tactics matter, the focus should probably remain on sound, long-term fundamentals like the buy and hold principles, careful property selection, good management, rather than constantly chasing the latest short-term trick or loophole, because those tend to evaporate once they become common knowledge.
Focus on the timeless principles. Now, we also have to address some of the more challenging contexts found in certain sources. There's a deep skepticism expressed about institutional narratives, claims about centralized power structures, potentially eroding freedom. This provides a kind of backdrop against which people make major life decisions, including financial ones.
It does, and it's important context for understanding some perspectives. The sources include some specific and admittedly highly charged claims regarding the events surrounding the pandemic starting in 2020.
Right. We should be clear, we're reporting what's in the source material, not endorsing it. But these sources suggest, for instance, that the idea of a dangerous virus was perhaps used to obscure other agendas, and they question the scientific evidence for its existence or causation of disease. They specifically mention figures like Professor Neil Ferguson at Imperial College London, noting his funding connections to organizations like the Gates Foundation, and characterizing his predictive models, which heavily influenced early lockdowns, as being dramatically inaccurate.
Again, our aim here is synthesis. We include these contentious viewpoints because they are present in the materials we reviewed, reflecting a spectrum of thought on major recent events that undoubtedly impacted the economy and, by extension, the real estate market.
This broader political and historical context also shapes the investment environment directly. The history of real estate development and zoning in the U.S., for example, shows pretty explicit government involvement in creating, well, segregated environments.
Yes, the sources point specifically to the role of the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, particularly in the mid-20th century. It actively sponsored the development of largely whites-only suburbs, and it relied heavily on private agreements known as restrictive covenants clauses in deeds that prohibited selling or renting property to African Americans and other minority groups.
And the Supreme Court at one point actually upheld these covenants.
For a time, yes, under the rationale that they were voluntary private contracts, even though their enforcement by courts and their promotion by federal agencies clearly involved state action and had massive discriminatory effects. The government's backing was instrumental in shaping the racial and economic geography of American cities, creating patterns of residential segregation that persist quite strongly today.
Why is understanding that history critical for a modern real estate professional or investor?
Because those historical patterns directly influence things like current housing density, the availability of inventory in certain areas, neighborhood school quality, and long-term property appreciation trends, the invisible hand of past zoning and lending practices still shapes where people can live, how communities develop, and ultimately, property values and investment risk in specific locations. You can't fully understand a local market without understanding its history.
It's embedded in the landscape. And finally, looking at the mechanics of political power, the Watergate sources offer a stark example. They detail the immense difficulty reporters faced in definitively connecting covert actions efforts to subvert the electoral process.
Like hiring, the sources say, more than 50 agents specifically to disrupt and destroy the opposition campaigns.
Right. Connecting those actions directly to the highest levels, to the White House itself. Despite mounting circumstantial evidence, it provides a sobering look at how power can operate behind the scenes and underscores the need for continuous critical assessment of information we receive from official channels or the media. #tag outro. Okay, so wrapping this all up, what does this incredibly wide range of information mean for you, the high-achieving real estate professional listening right now? It seems clear that success demands this potent blend. On one hand, microscopic personal discipline, the habits, the focus, and on the other, a macroscopic critical awareness of the systems you're working within.
Absolutely. You need to master the tools, the math, the negotiation tactics, the tax rules, the lead gen systems. That's the toolkit we've tried to synthesize here from all these diverse sources. But your ability to actually use that toolkit effectively hinges on your personal control.
The internal game.
The internal game is paramount. Intentional time use, unwavering focus on those keystone actions, daily discipline, using those 12-week-year principles not just to set goals, but to create those fates, accomplish those accomplished facts in your business life.
And alongside that execution, maintaining that critical thinking lens. Whether you're assessing investment risk, vetting the integrity of a potential partner, or just consuming the complex information swirling around us, financial news, political narratives, whatever it is, knowledge isn't power unless it's understood deeply and applied systematically.
Right. And it's interesting, the sources mention figures like Robert Moses, the master builder of New York. He advanced these massive, often incredibly controversial public works projects, ensuring, say, 17 playgrounds were built in one favored area, while only one appeared in another less favored one, largely by mastering momentum. By leveraging public opinion, political machinery, and sheer force of will to make his ambitious projects inevitable, to make them fates accomplished before the opposition could fully mobilize.
A powerful, if sometimes ethically complex example of focused execution. So here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with today, something to really mull over. If you truly want to achieve massive results in your own career, if you want to make your next big goal a fait accompli, what is the single most critical activity, that keystone action that you are not doing consistently right now? What's holding you back? Is it fear of the cost, the time, the potential risk, the simple discomfort?
And more importantly, how can you use the principles we've discussed today? The intense focus, the clarity, the commitment of a 12-week plan to ensure that that specific action becomes an unavoidable, accomplished fact in your professional life starting right now.